back here at the Hall of History, and we're going to look at some of the technological advantages to each side and some of the technologies that was incorporated into the American Civil War. One of the first and foremost, and again caused huge casualties, was the whole idea of these conical bullets. Instead of using just round balls like they used in the Revolutionary War, they made them more aerodynamic. So they would fly further and they would also shoot straighter. And definitely this caused a lot of injuries in the Civil War. Also, when these lead balls would penetrate the body, they would tumble in the body and cause massive damage. Well, it was interesting. Balloons were used for reconnaissance and sniper fire, and it worked somewhat. They had to be pretty near the battlefield, and I don't know, from what I've read, they really didn't change the course of the battle too much. But again, it was a technological advancement. The next, I get into the Civil War. You talk about these armor-plated steamships, and here's one here, and that's when the cannonballs would hit and they would bounce off. Notice the angle here; they're not perpendicular to the cannon fire from an enemy vessel. They were sloped at an angle, so the cannonball would bounce off. There's actually a submarine, the Huntley, and here's a picture of it here, and it actually went out there and did blow up a Union ship, but the problem was it sunk in. I believe it was just discovered and raised not too many years ago off one of I think it was the South Carolina coast. Another one which really increased the number of deaths and injury in the Civil War was the cannon, and the cannons became rifled, so they would also become have greater accuracy and fire farther. And also this whole idea of grape shot. If you look at these steel balls here, they look like little grapes. And when they fired out of the cannon, they would spread apart, and it would wipe out a swath of troops, and led to many injuries and many deaths. The telegraph started at this time, especially for the Union, and instantaneous communication. Communication intelligence is the key to any battle, and the North, as they were moving along, would immediately put up telegraph lines. There was a couple strategies that were used. Kind of the overall strategy of the Union was the anaconda plan, and an anaconda is a snake which would wrap around you and just suffocate you to death. And that was kind of the idea of the Union: blockade the southern ports, control the rivers, and just slowly destroy the Confederate Army. General Scott, who was the chief of staff, if you will, General Winfield Scott, put this plan together. The Confederacy, on the other hand, really thought of a war of attrition. The longer they could hold out, the more the people of the North would get tired of the war, and they would start to sue for peace. One thing the South also had going for it, if you study military history, was interior lines of communication. The South did not have to travel very far to get supplies and troops to any spot, where the North, being the surrounding army, had to move troops and supply greater distances. And also, most of the battles, the vast majority of the battles, occurred in the South, and so the Confederacy, the Confederate troops, were fighting on their home turf. And definitely, when you start fighting in your home state, you're going to put up a much more defiant struggle. And this definitely occurred. Here's kind of a picture of Scott's great snake, the anaconda plan, kind of encircling. Yeah, I guess eventually that's what the North did, but it took a lot longer, and the South proved much more of an opponent than the North came to realize. Well, one thing that the North and the South, these pretty much used the beginning of the Civil War, Napoleonic tactics. And we looked at this a little bit earlier this year, where the troops would just get in rows and start walking towards each other and firing. We looked at this when we looked at the Revolutionary War. And well, the problem was as the arms started getting better, in other words, the conical shaped bullets and the rifled barrels and better technology, more and more soldiers are getting killed. Also, the Union introduced repeating rifles, so you didn't have to load the rifle every time. You could load, as a Sharps carbine, you could load several shots in and just rapid fire. And this, the cavalry used this quite a bit, but it's also proved an advantage to the North. Later on, as the war progressed, it really ended up into trench warfare. If you get around, especially near the end of the war, you get around the Battle of Richmond with the trenches, and that really was a precursor to World War I, which was definitely a trench warfare. You know, neither side could advance very quickly. It was almost, you know, suicide to advance along the trench works. The medical care was horrible. There was no antiseptic. You know, soldiers were just thrown on a table, and amputation was, you know, was the common course of action for any wounded limb at all. And you can, you know, look at the numbers here. But actually, it was diseases and infections which really caused many of the deaths of the soldiers in the Civil War. There was not the medical facilities as we know of now. The number of casualties, if you look at this, the Union 360,000, the Confederates 258. Grant was called the Butcher of the North. He knew the North had more troops, and he was not afraid just to slug it out toe-to-toe with the Confederacy, because he realized, you know, sooner or later the overwhelming superiority in numbers would prove victorious. If you look at the total for the United States, you're looking at, you know, almost 620,000 soldiers died in the American Civil War, and it is the most deadly war in the United States history. If you ever have the opportunity to check some of the gravestones out or some of the battlefields, it's well worth your time. It kind of gives you a whole different perspective on what happened at this time. Well, that's what we have right now, and we'll see you later in the Hall of History.